Good morning, everybody. Now, I would like to introduce our final plenary speaker of this conference, Rex Sprouse. Indeed, I am so excited to introduce Professor Sprouse because he's one of my favorite professors and at the same time, a good friend here at IU. He's a favorite professor because whenever I needed help, he would make time to accept my appointment request, and he's a good friend because whenever I drop by his office, we would talk about various fun topics, including Turkey, Turkish food, Kurdish food, and he always make an effort to relate to us students. And I also liked the fact that he encouraged me to call him Rex without any titles like, I don't know, Professor, Doctor, or Your Majesty, because I would never imagine calling a professor without a title back in Turkey, but it was quite surprising for me indeed. So he has been a super nice professor and a friend here at IU for me. So Professor Sprouse is a professor of second language acquisition at Indiana University in the Department of Second Language Acquisition. He's also an adjunct professor in linguistics and Germanic studies. His primary research interests are second language acquisition, syntactic theory, structure and history of languages of Western Europe, and Turkish. He is well known in second language studies for proposing the full transfer, full access hypothesis together with Bonnie Schwartz from University of Hawaii. In fact, this proposal is likely the most cited proposal in L2 acquisition that has informed almost all L2 language theories, acquisition theories, and already making Professor Sprouse one of the most cited authors in linguistics. So he has done extensive research on syntax-semantics interface in English-French interlanguage. So currently he's developing the deep lexical transfer hypothesis, which is a reconceptualization of full transfer hypothesis. So most recently, he has also developed an interest in L2 phonology as well as L2 Turkish, in particular with respect to vowel harmony, which involves representations beyond segments as with syntax. This is great because L2 phonology needs more people like him who do theoretically informed and sophisticated research on L2 acquisition. Plus, having someone like him working on L2 phonology brings more visibility to this important area, which hopefully help attract additional researchers. So his paper is titled Language of Central Asia and Non-Native Language Acquisition. The sky is the limit. Please join me in welcoming Professor Rex.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming at all, since it's Sunday morning, and I'd like to thank Untitled and the organizers of this conference for generously inviting me. In fact, I should say that that attracting more researchers into the field is really what this talk is about. So. I hope that some of you will leave this talk with a renewed commitment to expand your research agendas, and I hope maybe I can convince myself to do that as well. So here we go. I hope. Oh wow! I actually pressed the right button. That's amazing. So what I would like to start out with be two observations. The first one is this: detailed comparative study of the languages and language groups, of Central Asia, so Turkic, Iranian, Mongolian, and so on, has the potential to make major contribution to the principles and parameters framework in much the same way as detailed comparative study of Romance, Germanic, Slavic, and Semitic languages has. Now, of course, I don't mean to suggest that there's been no research like this at all. Of course, there has been. Some perhaps well-known examples include Eva Chatto's 1996 work on relative clauses in Turkic languages, Aydin 2006 on relative clauses in Kyrgyz and Turkish, Kornfeld 2008 on non-subject relative clauses in Turkic languages. Relative clauses get an awful lot of airtime, by the way, in Turkic syntax. And also at this conference, an excellent talk by Zabina Lasakovitz, I hope I got that right, on possessors and subjects in the Turkic languages. Again, there certainly is some work on, published work on comparative Turkic morphosyntax, but my own perusal of journals suggests that many studies focus on a particular phenomenon in a particular Turkic language. That is, of course, very important, but it would be great if we could see a broader sweep of comparative study, again, such as what we've seen for Romance, Germanic, Slavic, and so on. Now, that observation I'm going to leave behind, though, now, because what I'm really going to focus on this morning is observation number 2. The languages of Central Asia have the potential for opening new empirical domains for hypothesis testing and refining models of non-native language acquisition. So what are some of the central questions in non-native language acquisition research in general? And this is very much acquisition research, broadly speaking, within the generative paradigm. So 1, do principles of universal grammar play the same role in adult non-native language acquisition that they play in child language acquisition? Those of you who have not been exploring second language acquisition as such might remember, well, back in Linguistics 101, we learned about the critical period hypothesis, so obviously the answer is no. Well, maybe that's not the right answer. Another question is this: is the initial state in non-native language what is the initial state in non-native language acquisition? What is the role of previously acquired grammars? Once upon a time, people talked about negative and positive transfer, but not necessarily in terms of the initial state of language acquisition, non-native language acquisition. And that's really been a major shift in the last 20 to 25 years. That when we talk about transfer now, we're not talking about just any old cross-linguistic influence. We're really talking about the initial state of non-native language acquisition. Well, this morning, when I came to my senses and realized that I could not even conduct a massive literature review of all acquisition research on all of the languages of the Central Asian region, let alone share that with you, I decided that I would, in fact, focus on 2 studies. Oh, and what do you know? Uner and I are the authors of one of them. So this morning I'd like to review Özçelik and Sprouse 2017, plus some work that we have presented but has not yet actually appeared in print. Later on I'll also talk about a recent paper in second language research, the journal Second Language Research, by Falah, Jabari, and Fazalatvar. Okay, so let's start with Özçelik and Sprouse. Here is the idea in a nutshell. Despite the poverty of stimulus and potentially misleading classroom instruction, not maliciously misleading, but misleading, English, Turkish L2ers exhibit sensitivity to the no crossing constraint of universal grammar when calculating non-canonical vowel harmony in the context of underlyingly pre-specified laterals in both low frequency and zero frequency contexts. And I hope that 15 minutes from now you will understand what that was supposed to say. So here we go. What was the theoretical motivation of our study? The theoretical motivation was this. Remember, one of the central questions is, do principles of universal grammar play the same role in adult non-native language acquisition that they play in child language acquisition? There are at least 4 distinct positions in the literature. I should probably say 4 families of positions. So here we go. Well, one answer is no. UG becomes inactive or inaccessible at some point in the human life cycle and thus plays no role in non-native language acquisition after that. And again, that is the classic critical period hypothesis. Well, a second position is, well, sort of, but only through the L1. So only those properties and or categories of universal grammar instantiated in the L1 grammar can be accessed in adult L2 acquisition. And I've given you several references, and in fact, if you read them carefully, there is some nuance across them. They're not all saying exactly the same thing. Another answer is, well, yes and no. UG is selectively impaired or partially accessible in adult L2 acquisition in very specific and very specifically identifiable domains. Then the fourth position is that UG remains fully active or accessible in the human brain throughout life and in principle plays the same role in non-native, in both native and non-native language acquisition, or at least UG would play the same role if it were not for the confounding factor of previously acquired grammars. One might add to that, and perhaps a very serious difference in the input available to adult learners. Now, there is a rich literature showing that principles of universal grammar constrain adult L2 morphosyntactic and syntactico-semantic development. And there have been, again, many studies, including the study of the interpretation of overt versus null pronouns in null subject languages, acceptability of remnant topicalization, remnant scrambling versus remnant topicalization, process versus result interpretation of double genitives, the multiple event requirement in floated versus in situ quantifiers, and so on and so on. These studies, when done well, share a threefold poverty of the stimulus in L2 acquisition. First of all, the critical generalization is underdetermined by the primary linguistic data. That is to say, you would need access to negative evidence, starred sentences. But of course, starred sentences do not occur in the primary linguistic data because they're starred. Secondly, the generalization is not instantiated in the learner's L1. If that were the case, then, well, okay, that's the UG through the L1 position. And then third, the generalization is not the subject of explicit instruction. Believe me, the things that people have looked at are not the subject of explicit instruction. Okay, now, the theoretical motivation for this particular study, there is very little research on whether principles of universal grammar constrain adult L2 phonological development. There's a great deal of research on the acquisition of new sounds, category formation in phonetics and phonology and so on, but rather little research on principles of universal grammar that would apply to phonology as such. I don't want to say there's no research. In fact, Öner Özçelik has been a leading pioneer in this work in his dissertation and in other publications. Okay, so let's turn now to the L1 target language background. So many of you will be aware, but perhaps, well, I'll just say it. Turkish has vowel harmony. Perhaps you have heard of this. Turkish has a beautiful, symmetrical, cube-shaped in my textbook from, the textbook I had as a student in 1991 at a major university in the Northeast. Vowel system that can be defined in terms of 3 binary features, plus minus back, plus minus round, plus minus high. Canonical Turkish vowel harmony works as follows. Vowels in uninflected words, let's call them roots, can exhibit all 8 logically possible combinations of the features, plus minus high, plus minus back, plus minus round. That gets you in, again, the 8 vowel system. Now, most, but not all, most vowels and suffixes are specified only for plus minus high. In non-initial syllables, and at least in the relevant suffixes, if a vowel is minus high, it also has to be minus round. That is to say, O and cannot occur as the result of vowel harmony in Turkish. For underspecified vowels, the value of plus minus back spreads from the immediately preceding vowel. And for the same set of vowels, the feature of plus minus round spreads from the immediately preceding vowel if the suffix vowel is plus high. Remember, if it's minus high, there is no rounding harmony in Turkish. Okay, so suppose you have a word bot, well, and you add the dative suffix, which is going to be minus high. Well, the relevant feature of the vowel O spreads to the V place of the suffix, giving you bot. Okay, so here you have, I'll give you 10 seconds to internalize this entire chart. And what you would see is that I am not just making this stuff up, right? These are well-known facts of how standard canonical vowel harmony works. Here we have a suffix vowel underlyingly specified as plus high. One interpretation is third person possessive, and as you can see, we get all four allomorphs realized across these 8 forms. Okay, when the suffix vowel is specified as minus high, again, it's going to have to remain minus round because we can't have O or in these contexts in Turkish. Now, the first complication. Turkish has laterals. We put the L in traditional with slanted lines, suggesting that it's a phoneme, but please don't take that too seriously. In general, here's how this works. Consider a root final L in inflected words. So you're going to have a vowel, and then the L, and then that's the end of that's the boundary, the morpheme boundary. Okay, and now we might or might not have some consonants in the suffix, and then we'll have another vowel. It follows from canonical vowel harmony that the 2 vowels in this context will be either both plus back or both minus back. When they're both plus back, the L will be realized as dark ol, and when they're both minus back, the L will be realized as light ul. Okay, and here are some examples. Again, the usual 10 seconds for internalizing the entire chart. Okay, time's up. Now, in the non-canonical distribution of L, though, something special happens. Some instances of the lateral are underlyingly pre-specified as light. That is just ul, not ol. In other words, they occur in the environment plus back. So Turkish has some words like rol, petrol, hal, where even though the preceding vowel is plus back, the L is light. Okay, so we have then the phenomenon that we have called actual non-canonical vowel harmony in Turkish. There really are words like this. So consider the environment of a root final L in inflected words. The immediately preceding vowel is plus back, but the adjacent L is minus back, coronal. Now, the no crossing constraint of universal grammar, which has been proposed in various forms over the years, blocks the spreading of plus back from the root vowel to the suffix vowel when there is a closer segment that can provide the relevant specification. In this instance, on our analysis, and we borrow from several well-substantiated analyses in the literature, what we're assuming is this. Just in these cases, there's a V place associated with a lateral, which is specified coronal, or minus back. That's now the closer source for spreading, and so just in instances like this, the feature spreads not from the preceding vowel, but from the immediately preceding consonant. Okay, and if you tried to have vowel harmony with the vowel, this would violate the no crossing constraint. Okay, so again, compare that with canonical vowel harmony. Now, in actual Turkish, to the best of our knowledge, there are no cases of the mirror image where a minus back vowel is immediately followed by a velarized L. However, were this to be the case, the L would, logically speaking, have to be pre-specified as dorsal, that is plus back, and the no crossing constraint should block the spreading of minus back to a suffixed vowel. That is to say, if there were a word like, I'll try to say it, rel, if you added the dative suffix, you should then get rella. You shouldn't be able to get relle, because that would violate, again, no crossing. Okay, so suppose that you are an English speaker acquiring Turkish as a new language. Could you arrive at this distribution of L's and vowels on the basis of your L1 English? The answer is no. Why? Well, because English does in fact have both velarized and non-velarized L's, but the distribution does not follow the Turkish distribution. It has to do with whether the L is in the the onset or the coda of the relevant syllable. Okay, so this presents now a fourfold poverty of the stimulus for English Turkish L2ers. Non-canonical vowel harmony is underdetermined by Turkish primary linguistic data. Again, there are some words that actually do instantiate this. Not a lot of words, and not a lot of words that certainly beginning learners are likely to hear. English does not instantiate vowel harmony, canonical or otherwise. The English distribution of the lateral differs from that in Turkish. Learners receive explicit instruction on canonical vowel harmony, but not on non-canonical vowel harmony. Then the fourth element, which is kind of unique, I think, to this study, is the following. See, Turkish if you're an English speaker and you're acquiring Turkish orthography is going to be one of your best friends, because compared with acquiring just about any other language I've ever been exposed to, you can really rely on the orthography for almost everything you need to know about pronunciation. However, in contemporary Turkish orthography, these non-canonical L's are not orthographically marked. Once upon a time, some of them were with little circumflex, but that's not what contemporary Turkish looks like. That's certainly not what contemporary Turkish textbooks look like. So almost just in this one case, even if you've been following everything else that you've been exposed to, the orthography could mislead you in just this instance, because the L is going to make, if you've already figured out, maybe you've been told that after back vowels you need to have a dark L, even if you know that, you're not going to know about this exception. Okay, so how did we test to see whether or not this could be acquired by adult learners? Well, the research question then is, again, can L2ers acquire this non-canonical vowel harmony? Well, here we devised a task that is really quite, in some ways, really quite simple. All you have to do in this task is select the vowel harmonically correct suffix on the basis of, and there are two different conditions, simultaneous auditory and orthographic stimulus, or on the basis of an auditory stimulus alone. In our study, we had 34 participants. They were divided into 3 groups, beginners, intermediate, and advanced, but the point is that we had 13, 10, and 11, again, as far as the L1 English, L2 Turkish folks are concerned. The participants had both classroom instruction in Turkish and various sorts of naturalistic exposure to the language. We also had a so-called control group of 14 Turkish native speakers. So the participants were, again, were presented with a Turkish word or pseudo word in roughly half the cases, and asked to choose the correct variant of a suffix from among 2 or 4 options, depending on whether the suffix has 4-way vowel harmony or 2-way vowel harmony. All of the words were presented as nouns, and the pseudo words were presented as if they were nouns. The suffixes were inflectional suffixes, so examples like the locative suffix or the first person singular possessive suffix. In some cases there are 2 allomorphs, in some cases there are 4 allomorphs. We had 256 semi-randomized items, all presented on a computer screen. So half of them, 128, were experimental, ending in a lateral. 128 were fillers, ending in other consonants. Of the 256, 128 were real words, and 128 were pseudo words. 128 were presented with auditory stimulus only, and the other half of the trials, both auditory and standard Turkish orthography presentation. Okay, so here are the suffixes that we use. These are suffixes you would learn very, very early in elementary Turkish. At Indiana University, we love this chart, but I'm not going to eat up time to tell you about it. But everything is as balanced as we could possibly make it. Okay, half of the experimental items had canonical L, that is the L surfaced as a light L in the environment of a front vowel, and dark L in the environment of back vowels. The other half had a non-canonical lateral, that is the quality of the lateral would have to be underlyingly specified. Again, examples like at the bottom, töl or rel. And again, that does not occur in Turkish. Then we had fillers, which we don't have time to talk about. Participants were individually tested. Okay, nothing exotic there. What are the results? The independent variables were the modality of presentation and the proficiency level. Dependent variable, proportion of participants' correct suffix choice. What do we find? What did we actually find? Okay, so you can all see this clearly, I hope? Okay, so first of all, the first, I need one of those pointer things, and I'm not very tall, so up there, way up there. Okay, so this is canonical vowel harmony, setting aside L altogether. Well, yeah, they're pretty good. Oh, a pointer. Oh, thank you. The red one. Wow, even this works. Thank you. Thank you. I'm always happy to take pointers from you, Yilmaz. So native speakers, near ceiling, advanced, near ceiling. Even intermediates are, when there's both auditory and visual presentation, near ceiling, very, very high accuracy as with auditory only. And even the beginners are near ceiling with auditory and visual. And when they have auditory only, so they're not just looking at it, right? So looking at the word helps, but just hearing it, they're getting the correct vowel harmony. Canonical vowel harmony appears to be something that is readily acquired, at least in an instructed context, even if your L1 does not have any kind of vowel harmony system. Okay, so now let's look at what happens when we have canonical vowel harmony with a canonical lateral. Well, the results, again, are very, very similar. For some reason, with auditory presentation, the beginner's not doing quite as well as with the others, but again, well above chance performance. Okay, what happens now when we have non-canonical vowel harmony, the kind that actually does occur? Now remember, half of the relevant examples are nonce words. So this cannot be a matter of just memorizing the forms, the individual words. Okay, what happens here is this. Interestingly, even the performance of native speakers goes down on this task. With auditory only, our non-natives are performing, again, above chance for sure, but not at the same kind of ceiling level. And when they have both auditory and visual presentation, the accuracy for the intermediates already drops considerably. Now, notice what happens with our beginners. When they only hear a word like rol, then they're, again, getting it right about 50%. But if they hear it and see it, their performance plummets, right? So presumably they're relying still on the kind of what they've learned, so to speak. Okay, what happens then with the hypothetical non-canonical vowel harmony? So again, this is something to which none of the participants have ever been exposed in any form. Well, interestingly, with auditory presentation, again, the native speakers are kind of at this low 80% performance, but if you show them the word, now the native speakers are confused, let's say. But so are the advanced participants are confused in pretty much the same way, but again, still way above chance on auditory only. Again, I just interpret this as confused with auditory plus visual. Again, you can see where the intermediates are, but notice that even the beginners are starting to respond to auditory only in a way that is very, very different from when they also see the word spelled out, and now they're probably applying the rule that they've been taught. Okay, so discussion. Okay, well, we've had the discussion. The modality of presentation was a very significant factor. When the potentially misleading effect of Turkish orthography, which does not distinguish dark from light L, it's certainly not in these contexts, is removed, the learners display emerging knowledge of non-canonical vowel harmony for both actual non-canonical and non-occurring, that is hypothetical, non-canonical vowel harmony. Despite the fact that classroom instruction alone, which is exclusively on canonical vowel harmony, leads learners to a completely different hypothesis, one where target-like behavior on non-canonical vowel harmony should be around 0%, or the mirror, that is the mirror image of their performance on canonical. Despite limited input being available for actual non-canonical vowel harmony, and crucially 0 input for hypothetical. So we're going to conclude that interlanguage phonologies are constrained by the no crossing constraint of universal grammar. There's nothing from the environment or from instruction from which they could be deriving these patterns. Okay, so Turks, in my experience, love South Park. um, so, so Mr. Mackey says, bad, okay? And then this is good. Okay, conclusion number 3. The need to adapt to a new orthography is an intriguing potential source of explanation for observational differences in the development between L1 and non-native acquisition, and many people, in fact, today are working on that question. So, future research agenda for acquisition of Central Asian languages. The investigation of non-native acquisition of vowel harmony systems by native speakers of languages with vowel harmony systems. That is to say, can we identify, and by the way, at the end of this presentation, there will be, I hope, some audience participation, because I would like to encourage you to think about some ways that we could expand our, I don't just mean Unner and me, I mean the field could expand the things we're looking at. So here's a question. Does previous knowledge of any vowel harmony system have a facilitative or an inhibitory effect on the acquisition of a new vowel harmony system? In particular, what if the two vowel harmony systems are very close but differ by 1 or 2 crucial features? Consider, for example, Turkish and Kyrgyz. So my understanding, I know little Turkish and less Kyrgyz, but my understanding of Kyrgyz is that there is also rounding harmony. So you can get O and in, as the output of vowel harmony. Otherwise, it's the system is very close to the Turkish system. So is a learner, in a sense, at an advantage by already having internalized one vowel harmony system, or is it a disadvantage if the two systems are very, very close? Because it might be harder for the parser, the brain, whatever it's doing this, to pick up on these, again, smaller differences. And this is a question that could be explored either in an L2 or an L3 context, for sure. How many more minutes do I have? 10 minutes, okay. Well, so I will give short shrift now to this other paper, but I think it will be a little simpler to talk about. So Falah, Jabari, and Fazalatfar, 2016. In a nutshell, so English shares with Mazandarani, but not with Persian, prenominal possessive structure. So my car, John's car. Early, I'm just going to say MP and E. Early MPE L3ers whose primary language of communication is M exhibit the prenominal possessive in their English interlanguage, while MPE L3ers whose primary language of communication is Persian, they pattern with the MPE group in exhibiting post-nominal possessors. I hope I said that correctly. So what's the theoretical motivation? Well, again, what is the initial state in non-native language acquisition, especially when we're going beyond the L2? There are at least 5 positions in the literature, and I better hurry up and finish my talk because soon there will probably be 6 or 7. There is an explosion of models, theoretical models of what's happening. By the way, I like to compare studying second language acquisition and third language acquisition with the difference between going to the moon versus going to Mars, because there's so many more things that could go wrong and so many more factors to control for. Okay, so here we go. Fasten your seatbelts. The cumulative, wait. Oh, I hope I didn't. Oh, I didn't, okay. Here's one model, the cumulative enhancement model. Previous acquisition of a given linguistic structure can facilitate the acquisition of the same structure in a new language. There is no, quote, negative transfer. Previously acquired structures cannot interfere with the acquisition of structures that are different in a new language. Model 2, the L1 factor. The grammatical properties of the L1 are either the preferred source or the only source of cross-linguistic influence in the acquisition of further languages in adulthood. Model number 3, the L2 status factor. The grammatical properties of the L2 form the initial grammatical state in the acquisition of a third language. Model number 4, the typological primacy model. A much beloved model here at Indiana University, by the way. At an early stage in L3 acquisition, the language acquisition device selects either the L1 or the L2 as the basis for the almost initial grammatical state, depending on which of the previously acquired languages appears to be more similar to the new language. And again, Jason, of course, is I think the founder of this school, to which I also belong, just in the interest of full disclosure. Okay, and there are some more details that just ask Jason. So brand new models, the scalpel model and the linguistic proximity model, grammatical properties of any previously acquired language can be incorporated into a developing interlanguage grammar. This occurs on a, quote, as needed basis, but there is no assurance that this will be only facilitative. So it could be facilitative or inhibitory. Okay, so this time the L1, L2 target language background is going to be a lot simpler than the first time. Persian has post-nominal possessives. Mazarandari and English have pre-nominal possessives. So this is true whether the possessor is a full NP or a pronoun. Everything on these slides about Persian and Mazandarani are Mazarandarani. You see how well I know this language. It is taken from that paper. So, and it appeared in second language research, so I'm just going to assume that's correct. Okay, so the researchers did something that's quite interesting that, to my knowledge, had not been done before. That's this: they asked the participants what language they use on a daily basis in different situations. So home, school, social settings. And there are, in the study, there were 24 folks who were native speakers of, I'm just going to call it Maz. Native speakers of Maz, they'd acquired Persian, and now they're learning English. And they could divide those folks up into 2 groups, depending on whether their primary language of communication on a day-to-day basis was Maz or Persian. So Maz A are MPE learners who primarily use M in their daily lives, and Maz B are people who primarily use Persian in their daily lives. The Persian group, they all use Persian in their daily lives, primarily. The tasks were very straightforward: a grammaticality judgment task, an element rearrangement task. You get some cards and you just rearrange them into to form a correct sentence, and elicited oral imitation task. The results. Well, guess what? In terms of accuracy, the Maz B group patterned together with the Persian group with extremely low accuracy. They liked or easily repeated and easily formed car. John's is very big, and John's car is very big. They did not like so well. The Maz A group, however, had the overwhelmingly the English-like target pattern. So here are the predicted sources of transfer according to the authors of the paper. So So the main point here is this: none of the previously existing models had a way of accommodating primary language of communication, right? So it's of course going to be the case that only, and that again was obviously a major determining factor in the outcome. So again, primary language of communication makes the correct predictions. Before Jason comes up and stabs me, I should say that I actually think they misinterpreted the typological proximity model. This actually is more what the scalpel model and the linguistic proximity model would have predicted. I think TMP would have predicted that should have been Persian, but it still wouldn't give you the results that they found. Okay, discussion. Okay, so according to these guys, all previously proposed models of cross-linguistic influence or transfer and L3 acquisition failed to predict these results. So we need a new model where the primary language of communication provides the basis for the initial state of interlanguage grammatical development. Now, let me also quickly add that at that point, one might think, oh, we should go back and look at all of those other studies that seem to give some other result and see if that really adds up, but that's a topic for future research. So, future research, speaking of which, I think that for future research regarding L3, we could identify instances of L3 acquisition with mirror image L1, L2 groups where the L3 and one of the previously acquired languages are Central Asian languages, which is not what the study I talked about did, right? The target language is English, and the learners already knew 2 Central Asian languages. Again, I'm wondering if we could find situations where people know 1 Central Asian language from whichever group, plus some typologically very different language, and then they're acquiring another Central Asian language. And I don't know of any research that is set up to examine exactly that. And again, I think we also need to carefully distinguish standard sequential bilingualism from heritage language as well. And that's it. So.
Questions? All right.
Rex, do you mind a specific question about the phonology that you're studying? Okay, sorry, Catherine. Would you like to go ahead? No, go ahead. Rex, would you mind giving us a bit more details about the methods that you used for your Turkish task? I was unclear in particular about how the choices were presented. So it said auditory versus auditory and visual. But if the choices are presented on the screen, how did you do that?
Push it again, maybe? That's how you activate it.
Oh, I see. Thank you. Yes, so to the best of my recollection at this point in time, and if I'm wrong, Uner can correct me, the participants were sitting at a computer screen, had headphones. Sometimes they just heard something, and then they had to choose what the right suffix would be. And then sometimes.
What was the format of that? On the screen? Was it also auditory?
No. I'm sorry. No, they always saw the choices, and then you push a button for which are the choices. And the choices were always what, in fact, were the 2 or 4 allomorphs that would have been possibilities, right? So there was no, in that sense, just wildly distracting choices. Of course, right, so I may be missing a part of your question, though. So there was always something on the screen in terms of the choices, but the stimulus sometimes, half of the time, was you just heard this, and then sometimes you heard it and saw it in standard orthography as well.
Right. So there was no part of the experiment that was entirely auditory.
That's correct.
The choices were never auditory.
That's correct.
Okay, I just needed clarification.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Is it?
I mean, in a sense, it's kind of like entirely auditory, but the choices. Right, but not the options. The options aren't really written. They need to give the options, so they need to choose the right options.
Auditor, did they hear the auditory options one by one?
Wait. So they did not hear basically. So always auditory, but sometimes half of the time also written, right? But the written part is the root word. So the root word, they see half of the time, and half of the time they don't see the root word. But the choices, yes, are
Always
written. Yes, exactly. The choices being the suffixes, and the suffixes they already know. They already know that, for example, for possessive suffix, there are 4 versions: im, So they already know that, and that's written. So they need to choose which one they heard on paper, on the screen. But the root word is not written, so they don't know. Sometimes written, half of the time. Petrol is written. Half of the time, a word like petrol is not written. They have to hear and then choose the right option.
I think Kathleen is next, but
Just a quick question on the same thing.
Sure.
Did you run the real words and the invented words separately?
No, they were randomized.
No, I mean, in your analysis, did you run them
Oh,
separately?
yeah, there was no statistically significant difference.
Thanks.
Thank you. Rex, one comment, one question. First the comment. I don't know how those people who say that there is no universal grammar effects in second language phonology, because the evidence is so abundant. I mean, it's really hard to defend that position anyway. I mean, I can cite individual examples if needed, but going back to the Turkish thing, the clear L or the dark L, obviously these participants, the learners, are coming from English,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Which English demands dark L in quota position completely. Actually, even in the onset position, it's not really clear. It's less dark. Let's put it this way. Yeah. Okay.
I've been corrupted by German.
That's fine. I mean, in British English, maybe it's really clear, because they would say law for L-A-W, but no American would say law. It's law in American English.
Law. Well, and
We don't have
vowel
that.
too.
Anyway, so the thing is, to what extent these participants are able to hear the difference between clear L and the dark L when they hear? Has,
80%.
Yeah, I was going to say 80% to 20%. So an additional experiment could be like an ABX task or something like
Right.
that.
and so there are 2 factors. One of them is English is pushing them to the back.
Oh, in general, yeah.
Yeah.
But that should make it, do you think that would make it easier or harder for them to pick up on the non-canonical? On the non-occurring non-canonical?
If the final L is clear in Turkish, then that would be a problem for them because they are inclined to go to the dark L because of English as well. And the orthography doesn't make any distinction between the two.
But wouldn't you get then the mirror image problem for the other set of cases?
And I am familiar with so many English-speaking people learning Turkish doing exactly the same kind of mistake. When it is a clear L, they go to the dark L in English, and then the dark L would give
only thing I could say off the top of my head is, whatever that would be for one half of the cases, then you would expect the opposite effect for the other half of cases in terms of accuracy.
Right.
And that's really not what we saw.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, definitely. I mean, the English effect has to be, recognized over there to separate what is coming from L1 influence as opposed to non-L1 influence, whatever that is.
Right. Yeah, we love L1 influence, by the way, for the beginning learner. So that's not what was, if anything, what was wonderfully shocking at not as linguists but as people interested in language learning is how well the beginners did on the canonical cases. So they, by hook or by crook, they really are picking up on this in general. I mean, quite well, I think, and early on. Does anyone have any suggestions for further research that might involve Central Asian languages in non-native language acquisition contexts? Oh, here we go.
You did mention asking, I think this is kind of related, of asking about comparing different Central Asian languages with kind of opposite types of vowel harmony. So to compare the difference in rounding harmony, you mentioned it was Turkish to, I think, Kyrgyz. Another one, the possibility is also Turkish to Mongolian.
Yes.
Because Mongolian also has back rounding harmony. Just anecdotally speaking, I can say that when going from Mongolian to Turkish, it's very intuitive for me, this straightforward front-back harmony, right? But then the high vowel rounding harmony is very unintuitive because it doesn't match the Mongolian rounding harmony, which only exists for the non-high vowels. So there is some, at least in my experience, you do see the misalignment of the vowel harmony for rounding causing a lack of learning for L1, for L3, just at the very beginning.
Doesn't Mongolian also have some kind of ATR?
So Mongolian has ATR instead of the front-back harmony. But it functions in parallel, though, functionally speaking. It just has a different phonetic base, but yeah. So this that you can look at Mongolian as well.
Does the Mongolian had backness harmony, which later led to ATR harmony?
What's that? Do you want to say something?
So, besides harmony can also get stress patterns because all these lines
Running into the microphone.
So sorry. You can also look at stress patterns because most of these languages have final stress, but not necessarily the same cues of stress or the same pre-stressing suffixes. And you'll probably have interlanguage effects of, oh, this is a pre-stressing in Turkish, but not in Uzbek. I will use it. Oh no, Turkish likes to have duration as an effect of stress, but not focus, but not pitch. So it's pretty easy to just mesh with those villains, confuse each other.
Yeah, thank you. Was there anything in Mongolian L2 or it was just Mongolian?
Mongolian L2, yes.
So it's
Go ahead.
so Öner Özçelik also does have a paper on they were native speakers of English though, right? So what we need to do is, I'm sure there are just thousands of people hanging around the streets of Ankara who are monolingual adult speakers of Turkish who are now acquiring Mongolian as their second language. And we can study them. Yeah, one of the, I'm surprised no one has said this, you have all of these, the sky's the limit ideas, but where are you going to find the actual people who fit the profiles that you're talking about? But I think Jason had a question or comment.
It's more like two comments. So first I'm going to take the call that you asked for, and that would be not for third language, but I think there's a real opportunity here for heritage speakers and actually bring in some things that are universal versus some things that are language specific when we know that they vary a lot. So phonology is completely understudied, as I mentioned before, because in part there's an assumption that they're just better, right? So some things we know about Turkish in the context of Europe is that DOT values seem to be, in a sense, hybrid, that they might be much more Turkish than German, but there is some effect of German and Dutch and some other things, right? But what might be nice is for you to juxtapose, to bring that which is essentially language specific versus seeing something like this, which should be constrained, and if it's constrained by universal grammar, we should predict that they would be really good at this, but potentially not where the languages can mix and have an effect in a different sense, right? And then it would follow from a general sense of their experiences, right? So that's the first comment. So I think you can do a lot with this in various heritage languages.
And since at this point we're already clearly into the third generation of Turco-Germans in some communities, one might even be able to get a generation nuanced set of participants.
Exactly. And so I have a third language. It's more of a comment, and I hope it's not a defensive comment. It wouldn't be towards you anyway, but I want your opinion on this. So, you know, looking at the study that you looked at, one thing that stands out to me, and actually is exciting about it, is how different it is from the typical type of study that's done in third language acquisition. And I think I can at least speak for the typological primacy model when I say that it's constructed on the basis of the typical case, at least in the Western world's mind, of L3 acquisition after adult L2 acquisition, right? And so these are heritage speakers in a sense, or they're bilinguals, they're naturalistic bilinguals at learning a third language. And so it might be that the models hold a little differently for them. But I think that if you were to derive a model out of what they're saying, which is basically that the language most used is going to have an effect, there's a lot of evidence in the existing literature to suggest that that's wrong. And the reason that would be is because for most studies, I'd say, and we can now say, we've done a meta-analysis of 84 studies, and I think almost all except for their 2 studies is the case of adult L2 acquirers, successive bilinguals, learning in L3. There is an overwhelming, it should be the case then that the L1 always has precedent, because what will almost always be the case is that the L1 continues to be the much more used daily language. And I don't have to tell you that there's plenty of evidence to show that that's not true. But it might be that if you're a naturalistic bilingual, something is different and use matters more. Do you agree?
It's an empirical question. No, I agree, and I certainly agree that that one of the things about moving away from as important and wonderful, and I just can't say enough great things about English, Spanish, English, L3 Portuguese studies, which are the heart and which are the empirical core of what we know about L3 acquisition at this point. I think turning to, for example, the Central Asian region, we could see a whole bunch of different sort of, sociological arrangements, shall we say. I mean, perhaps one could do that in the Americas as well, but it's just so, so much more efficient to look at L3 Portuguese, because we have a lot of L3 Portuguese folks in the United States. But yeah, I mean, kind of sorting out those things, I think, would be really good. There's a part of me that wishes that the authors of that study had told us a lot more about these extra linguistic variables of the study population.
Any other questions? One last question we can
Thank you very much for the interesting topic. This is not a question, but I wanted to also offer something. Last year, during the ACES, we presented a paper comparing the Azerbaijani Turkic with Kazakh. So showing the differences there, you were talking about round vowels and changes there, syntax, and a lot of things. I would be more than happy to share a bit on that. That might be of some help.
Thank you.
Please, let's thank